So good morning and welcome. My name is Adam Juran. I work for Forum One, which is a US company based in Alexandria, Virginia. I live in Brussels now, just got married, and I'm here to talk about component-based theming using Pattern Lab and Twig, specifically with Drupal 8. So we're just gonna jump in and get started, and let's see if my slide thing works. Yes, component-based theming with Twig. So this session, we're going to attempt in 45 minutes to present all the information that myself and these three other gentlemen presented at DrupalCon Baltimore in a training, in an 8-hour training. My goal is to present all that information. Obviously, we won't work through it in the same way, but my goal is to present it. How many of you are not native English speakers? Raise your hand. Yeah. I tend to speak quickly. If I start going too fast or you cannot understand me, please just raise your hand and say, "Whoa, Adam, slow down." Okay? Or if you can't understand my mid-Atlantic accent. All right? So moving right along. Here is an overview of what we're going to cover today, or the overview, including the overview, tools, components, how we integrate those components, component libraries, and we'll talk about what that means when we get there. And if we have time, UI patterns. So let's get started with the overview. Patterns. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. For example, the purpose of zebra stripes is to confuse a lion's ability to see the zebra burger pattern. Humans have incredible pattern recognition, which has given us an incredible advantage over other animals as we have evolved. Come on through. Can you guys read this? Take a second. So obviously, recognizing patterns is central to learning. And this email chain has been passed around for years. And while what it says is not actually correct, there was no study at Cambridge, the point is still valid. We don't process letters individually, but words as a whole. And you can use context to find letters grouped together or words grouped together so that you can understand it more quickly. And we're so good at finding patterns, sometimes we see patterns that aren't even there. You guys know who Rorschach is? Psychologist? So Rorschach is a psychologist. He did all these experiments with these ink blots, which were just ink blots, but he presented them to people and asked them to say what they saw. And invariably, people would say what they would see was based upon their own perception. So the point is, we see patterns sometimes when they're not there. That's how good we are at finding patterns. For example, right? It's just a cloud. Or faces. In fact, the @FacesPics Twitter handle has over 500,000 followers, because that's how much we like finding patterns. So aside from cloud animals and faces in toasters, the big benefit of being awesome at recognizing patterns is that it allows us to process information quickly. Visual designers and user experience experts can take advantage of this to create interfaces that we find intuitive. Apple spent a lot of time on their interface patterns so that you see the same patterns over and over again. Now, websites are a combination of patterns that we have become accustomed to seeing: breadcrumbs, main menu, navigation, teasers, etc., so that we can interact very quickly. Do you guys remember markup that used to look like this? Yeah. So this is an inspector view of an old Drupal site So for a long time in web development, we didn't think about patterns. We just let the back-end developer build the site, and us front-end developers would just hang whatever styles we could based upon the markup that was there. But that ended up giving us CSS selectors that might look like this. And the experience of maintaining those CSS selectors felt like this. Yeah, that's what it felt like. But that's not how we should be doing things. We're not doing print design where every page is unique. We're creating a design system made up of small, repeatable patterns, which we're going to call components. The component-based approach is much easier to maintain. Here's the markup for a single component. You can tell it's the hero component because of the class on the main wrapper, div class equals hero. But this is also because the markup itself lives in a template file named hero.twig. So already from a maintenance point of view, you know that your hero component lives in hero.twig. All of its classes will be hero underscore underscore something or hero dash dash something. We'll get to the DEM syntax in a bit. Here is some sample styling for the hero. All the classes start with a component named hero, which not only makes sure that the styling applies to this component and only this component, again, an aspect of maintainability, but it makes it very easy to track down the files that created. So when you are debugging, you can look at a class and go, oh, I know exactly where to find this class in my SAS so that I can make the fix that I need to make. So identifying components. Here's the sports page of the New York Times. On the right side, you have a closer view zoomed in. So let's take a second, and if you guys can raise your hands or just shout out, what are some of the components on this page, the right part?
News item.
The what? News item, yes. Several of those.
Teaser.
Louder, please.
The teaser.
The teaser, yes.
The menu.
The menu is a component. Sorry?
The grid.
The grid, yeah, the grid at the bottom, absolutely. The title is a component as well. Here they are marked out for you. There are actually 3 different types of teasers. The first 2 in the blue have the same aspect ratio in the image, and so that could be a variant of one another. The 2 in the green on the right, absolutely the same, and the 5 on the bottom, also absolutely the same. You can see that components can also live inside of other components. Like the image is a component that is part of these card teasers at the bottom. And what that allows us is joining components together to form components, larger components, pages, and of course, robots. Do you guys remember Voltron? Yes! All right. So there are even more components on this page, the layout components, the whole page, 2 columns there, full width on the bottom. So identifying what constitutes a component and what is a subpart of it can be tricky. But you want to look for repeating patterns to try to separate out pure layout. For example, you might define each of the bottom components as a card that lives inside of a grid component, like we just discussed. But then you wouldn't want to call the whole thing cards and then name the first one card 1 and the second one card 2, etc., because this makes it, then it's not really a component and it's not reusable anymore. It would be very difficult to change what would go inside the section. For example, if you didn't want cards and you wanted teasers, but the container is called cards, you've kind of, backed yourself into a corner. So, now can we agree that components are awesome? Yes, of course we can. But now we're going to take a quicker look at what makes up these components. So, components are, we declare that there are these 4 things. Independent, that is, can exist on their own, Styles and functionality should not bleed into other components, does not depend on context. They're clearly defined, which means limited in scope for one specific job. Encapsulated, which is a direction we've been moving to. Styling, markup, JavaScript, etc. will exist in specific self-contained files, and as you'll see in our current structure at Forum 1, in a single folder, so it's now movable between projects, and reusable, because that's the whole point of, don't repeat yourself, DRY. So, how many of you are already familiar with BEM? BEM stands for Block Element Modifier methodology. It is a methodology for naming classes, which allows for a more organized approach to your theming. It helps you understand the relationship between your classes, etc. So the block refers to the top level of abstraction, frequently a div, but not always. Elements or child elements can be placed inside of these. You might have block, and then the element would be block underscore underscore title. Elements always have the format of underscore underscore between the block and whatever the element name is. If your element name has multiple words, that is separated by a single hyphen if you want. So for example, block underscore underscore title hyphen thing, if you want. Whatever the words are, that's what it would be. And modifiers manipulate the block to differentiate it from the original block, or for example, if you had one block which had a pink background, the modifier at the same level as the block would be block hyphen hyphen pink. And we'll see what that looks like here. Here's the basic block. Here's what an element looks like. There's the HTML versus the CSS. Here's the variants. That's what that would look like. You can nest components, as a better example of that right there. So if you had a teaser title, teaser content, teaser summary inside, and inside of teaser content you have teaser summary and a button, a large button in fact. Any questions about any of this so far? No, good. Moving right along. We're doing good. So, Pattern Lab. How many of you are familiar with Pattern Lab? Not quite half of you. All right, I'm going to, is this where we do the pattern? So I'll tell you what Pattern Lab is first, then we're going to do a quick demo so that you are caught up. Pattern Lab is a tool created by Brad Frost. It allows us to, it's basically a living style guide. It allows you to create components and then hook them all together visually. Has built-in responsive functionality. You can put in real-looking content. You can put in your JavaScript. And it allows you to have the client approve the design in a browser and not just Photoshop or whatever other visual tool that you're using. And the advantage of this is once I have a design, I don't have to wait for the devs to build it. I build the markup in Pattern Lab, and especially now in Drupal 8 where the backend devs need to have almost zero say in what the markup is, I can go ahead and build out the entire site in Pattern Lab and fix my templates and then hand it to the backend developer and say, go make this work. My work's done. Obviously it's not that simple. There's some negotiation back and forth, but it changes how businesses, you don't have to timeline a project where all the backend happens first. I frequently get ahead of my backend devs or say, this is the markup I'd like. Can we work with that? So we're going to do a very quick Pattern Lab demo. This is what I want. Can I do? No, hold on a second. Oh, but I'm terrible at this point. Can I get over here? How do I stop presenting? No. Yes. No. Sorry, this is the part. If you want to help me over here, get out of this presentation this way. There it is. Hold on. Escape. Yes. And now let's move this one over. All right. So this is a little strange. Oh, this is this one. That's fine. So this is a site that I'm working on. I really can't see what I'm doing quite. All right. So this is Pattern Lab. And what it allows you to do is, I'm looking at the all view up here. And this is really basic. I've got my colors defined, fonts, heading styles. This is a very much in process site. Here are there's lots of different sections with their own color themes. And so there's different block quotes, etc. I'm just going to quickly scroll through parts of this. It's got all the text styles, tables, how tables will look, form elements, image styles, etc. And just to show you, so one of my sections, this is not a full page, but it's mocked up. You can see that I already have working. This is just HTML and CSS and some JavaScript. You slide in that stuff, right? These are, and obviously there's no content in here, and it works responsibly, etc. So this is, and it can do this, and Disco is fun. Disco randomly chooses sizes and adjusts. So this is like the real test is, does my site work responsibly? Is you turn on Disco. So what it looks like on the inside from your browser, from your web, your HTML editor point of view, we'll get to in a second. But this is what it looks like on the outside from the client viewing in. Now, if I can see. Yes. We're gonna goodbye. We're gonna go back. Oh, stop. What was the next slide? Let's just go to the next slide. So I'm just going to leave it on this because I have to go back and forth in a second. Gesso is the name of Forum One's in-house theme. You'll find it there. I love working with this theme. I've worked with a lot of different themes, including back in the day Zen and Omega and Bartik, and, But Gesso is a term from art. It is the primer that you put on a canvas. So it has some very, very basic neutral classes and CSS already into it, but it really is ready for you to jump in and start theming a site from the get-go. It is responsive and SaaS-based, and it comes with some best practices already baked in, such as accessibility. One of the authors of it is legally blind and deaf. His name is Dan Mouillard. If you've ever seen him present or not, you can find, he's presented at DrupalCon in the US. He's brilliant. And also plays ragtime piano really well. It's awesome. There's a mobile menu built in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of stuff that is baked in and baked. Where's my cursor? So, yes. So Pattern Lab, we have a Pattern Lab starter kit for Gesso, and we've made a few customizations. We put Pattern Lab inside of the theme because for all intents and purposes, we're trying to share as much as possible between our patterns and the actual HTML templates, which is where we're going with this. We also share images, CSS, and JS, and we've changed a few names of the folders because Atoms, Molecules, Organisms works, but then templates, and then you're not really in the land of biology anymore. So we changed a few of those. What have we got here? So, speak again. So here's the design we're going to be working with, just to So you can see some of the components that we're going to talk mostly about are the hero. You can see that it has a background image, which you won't see because I have Twig debug turned on. That is just one of the sad things about Twig debug. Twig debug is useful in other ways. So if you're wondering why you don't see a pretty picture of a whale, that's why. It has a title, a blurb, and a button. And you can see the featured sections and cards, etc. But so on, etc. Where is it's so bad about going back and forth between like these things. You. No. Oh well. How do I get to the next one? Sorry. So that was the overview. That was the overview. Now into the tools. So recognize some of these. We have Grunt, NPM, Composer, Drush, and Drupal Console. These are some of the tools. How many of you have some familiarity with some of these? How many of you have never heard of any of these things? Okay, thank God. So Grunt is a task runner. NPM allows us to install lots of things with the typing of a few letters. Composer does the same. I'm a web developer, not a computer programmer, and so like I know what my hammer is, but I don't know how to like make a hammer. I mean, I do, but like I don't want to have to do that. It's just these are my hammers, right? These are my toolbox. I don't need to know exactly how each of them works. I know what they do. I'm not my brother who writes his own IDEs, right? Drush, which does lots of magical things with Drupal, and that's Drupal Console, although I think we're moving to Aquia Desktop and setting things up. But that's not important now. That talks about Node and NPM. So this tells you what it is. It's a package manager for JavaScript modules. These are all things that you need to use when setting up Gesso and Pattern Lab via package JSON. I'm not going to talk too much about this stuff because it's not the juice of this presentation. Grunt is a task runner, automates tedious things. It does lots of great stuff. If you really want to look at the grunt.js file afterwards with me, happy to do that. There's a little bit of it. Components. Yeah, so I'm going to go now. I can get out of this again. And stop mirroring. Oh, where's my cursor? Oh my gosh. There it is. Great. Now we can be on the same thing because I don't have to present anymore. Alrighty. So, components. There we go. So, we looked at the design. You guys remember what the design looked like? The big thing, hero, etc. So, what branch am I in? That should work. Source. Patterns. So, here, look over the left. This is is the resolution okay, or do you need to make it bigger? Yeah, 1 second. No? Can someone, I'm sorry, I don't know why I made it so small. Is that easier? Hold on. That did not help.
You can press Command plus when you're in.
All right. But you still can't see. Over here, it's the hero SCSS, hero.twig, hero.yaml, and a README. So let's start with the hero.twig. This Actually, we're going to start with button. Very simple here, right? Again, I got to make this. Can you see it now? Great. This is a very simple button.twig file, right? URL, class, a modifier if we need it, and a label. For presenting this in Pattern Lab, there's a YAML file which has some dummy data in it, right? If we're going to use, but you can have a variant using the twig including the button, and we're sending these to override what is in the YAML file. And what does the outline give us? There you go. Outline is going to give us the border and make the text uppercase, basic styling. This all lives in a folder, patterns. So this is Pattern Lab, source, patterns, components, button, all of that lives together inside of there. That is one component. Hero is something else. Here's the hero. A little more complicated. We have a layout constraint to make sure that the content is limited to whatever we've defined L constraint to. Content with the title and the text. Now, we're including a button if the button URL is defined. This is twig include. Here's the default values. Here's all our fun CSS. Now, that's all nice and jolly, but I want to actually, give me 1 second. I want to be back here. But when we come to the Drupal side of things, we're still here. All right? Paragraph, is it paragraph, not paragraph, what do I want? Do I have hero in here at all yet? Yes. Templates. I want that. Oh, but you're not. Sorry. Where are you? Templates, paragraph. Because you weren't showing up a minute ago. That's not right. Sorry. Let me go back. So in Drupal 8, here we are in the actual HTML.twig. I don't know if you can see that right there. It's paragraph -- hero HTML.twig. So this is what Drupal is using, and it's not quite the same as what Pattern Lab is using, and that is the problem which we're attempting to solve. And the reason being is because we want our source to be canonical. We want one place where the markup is the same. Because if Pattern Lab's a wonderful tool, Pattern Lab uses Twig, Drupal 8 uses Twig. Why should we keep them separate? So that's the goal. That's the problem that we are now going to try to solve. But as you can see, it's not exactly the same thing, right? Here, a title being injected that way, as opposed to here, content.field heading, field value. Pattern Lab can't possibly understand this, and vice versa. Questions about that? No. All right, great. Additionally, how we're doing the button is a little bit different as well. We're passing in the field value and the button label here in the Drupal side of things. But back up here, we're able to use Twig include. Why can't we do anything like that on the Drupal side? Well, you can. And that is the next fun step. So I think I need to be in this version of it. So let's go, yeah, this one. So now there's been a few changes here, but this isn't actually the important change happens over. I've already enabled this module. It's called component libraries. And it allows for Twig namespacing. And what does that mean? It means that you can reference Twig files from your Drupal files and include them. That sounds really complicated, and it's actually not. And I'm going to show you how it works. So once you've activated that module, you download it, and it's just another module. And you go to your theme.info.yaml file, and you add the namespaces. You say for base, I want you to look here, and this allows you to reference these templates from your Drupal files. And what that will look like now is this. That is the Twig namespacing. It allows you to send, for this Twig variable, send this content. For this Twig variable, send this Twig content, and so on, etc. And additionally, allows you to embed the button, include the button the exact same way. You're sending button modifier, so on, etc. straight back into. So we have hero image, title, text, button modifier, URL label, hero title, hero text. Did what I just show you from the back end side make any sense? That's not a lot of yeses. Please, let's go. So we have a little bit of time. We have about 12, 15 minutes. So that's really the main point of what I wanted to demonstrate is that it is now possible to have all of your markup in Pattern Lab, and that Drupal will just pull those same templates in. So let's go back, let's take a step back, let me answer questions and review that so that y'all can leave having some understanding. Obviously, this is why this was an 8-hour training, and everyone had a chance to try it and see what it was like. And getting it into 45 minutes is a challenge. You had a question.
So basically, you're including the Twig templates.
I'm sorry, I need you to speak a little louder.
Basically, you're including the Twig components inside of the theme by using the components.
So basically, I'm telling the Drupal templates to say, you don't need your own markup. Look, I want you to use the markup that is here in Pattern Lab, and I'm going to send you the variables so that I don't have two sets of markup. The goal is to have one set of everything, one set of markup, one set of CSS, one set of JavaScript that I can go ahead and build ahead of time before the dev is, and I can put in my dummy content. I can work out how my titles that are going to run to 3 and 4 lines are going to lay out separately from waiting for the backend dev to build the site or for the client to give me the content. The ramifications of this go far beyond just the ability to do this, which in and of itself, I think is great, but it can change how your company plans. You know, if you have projects coming up and your front enders have time and your back enders don't, the front enders can do the work before the back enders. It creates a much, or if you do both, you're not forced to build it out first. You can do the theming first. If you have the designs, sometimes, you know, in Agile, you just don't know what information you're going to get when. So this gives you some flexibility. So please more questions, because I could just talk and say this over and over again, and that wouldn't necessarily help you understand better. I mean, do people have a rough idea of, without doing it, I know it's very, very hard, but I would love some more questions. Can't hear you.
I think you put it right. Very clear to us.
Okay. So then, I mean, I can show you some more patterns here. I mean, that entire Pacific Whale Conservancy site is built out. So let's talk about, let's say, I don't know, take the card media, body, X1, etc. Now here, this is a little more complicated where we have to get the image URL and alt from the, you have to dig down into the media module, into the entity, excuse me, to get the image, style it as card, and then pass those through. But I'm gonna maybe demonstrate something. So here we have the website, right? And this was the hero. I'm gonna do something very silly. I'm gonna go to the paragraph hero. So here was the Drupal side. I'm gonna make a change in Pattern Lab. This is the Pattern Lab file, right? So this is just to make the point. Oops, not the right spot. Or you could work for me. What's wrong, buddy? I'll have to get inside the theme. Themes. This is Grunt doing its thing. I could have just as easily done this in the CSS, but I just did it there to make the point. Now the background is red. I changed the Pattern Lab file. I didn't touch the Twig, the Drupal template. This is not Pattern Lab. This is, yes, sir.
Basically, you're including all the component Twig files in your team, and you're including them in the Twig files which are provided by Drupal, like the paragraph bundle, Twig templates.
Just telling it to use the markup somewhere else, from somewhere else.
So when you use include with, then you're actually defining the variables which are defined in the Twig template which you include.
Yes, when I use the include with, it's saying, instead of whatever you have in your YAML for purely display, use these actual variables I got from Drupal.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So if I understand this correctly, like the Pattern Lab folders that can be developed in isolation, and you just like reference it later, right?
Yes.
And then the Drupal Twig files are just like, use this template with these variables. And that's it.
Basically, yes. That is the gist of it. Yes, sir.
So if the backend developer has
That is correct. Like I said before, there is some back and forth that still has to happen. You would need that image style ahead of time. One of the things that this technique leads to is planning out of how a site is themed. I shouldn't have closed that. Do I have 1 second? Themes, PWC. No, it should be. Yes, thank goodness. So you can choose the colors, from the designer. You have your colors and you have your typography and where's the image styles? Maybe. Well, image styles should be. There's an image style, but that's really it. The image styles can get defined before you do anything else, just like the colors and fonts and various other types of things, so that you could say, hey, can you build this for me first? Right before they get involved in whatever hairy back-end stuff they're going to do. Dave, you had a question?
Yeah, was a bit disappointed that you didn't cover vehicle force versus line force. So I'd like to know your opinion.
So which versus which?
Vulture on vehicle force.
Well, you know what? We can discuss that in Vienna.
Okay.
All right. Yes, sir.
In one of the examples, you were using like an image style filter.
Yes.
Is that an extra module? Where does that come from?
So that comes from, we used the media module to manage images, and that was just if you had to drill down into the media entity to find out where that image lived, it's one, for example, it's one of the drawbacks that if you're going to use this kind of technique, you have to send to, the Pattern Lab can't look up Drupal stuff. You have to have it already figured out. Whereas if you weren't using this technique, you could simply use some sort of a render. But we don't want it rendered. We want the actual URL sent back to Pattern Lab so that I can use the exact markup that I want. So it's one of the casualties, one of the drawbacks of this technique. But I think it's relatively minor considering all of the benefits. That's all.
Shows like H template or no template? Because
Yeah.
I feel like it's easy for like fields and stuff.
Sure. So in Pattern Lab or the other one? In Pattern Lab, it's that. That's not very exciting. And in templates, here's the homepage. And then inside of layouts, main maybe is the most interesting one. So again, that's just kind of boring Pattern Lab, just putting stuff in. Here are the components that made up the featured, here's the updates, the hero is that. It's just pulling that in. Now, looking at it from the purely, I think you're interested in, they changed the name of this layout. So, this not unlike, this hasn't changed too much. This is the HTML.twig for the page, for HTML. Here's the page one. Again, this isn't changed too much. Doesn't really affect it at this level, right? Content. Region, it's not incredibly exciting. It really doesn't mess with this. Because it's components. It's like it's putting the stuff inside, not worrying about the wrapper. What are you trying to get at?
But now you have HTML in like the HTML twig inside the Drupal. Like, isn't the idea to not have the div class layout container is not something you will find in the Pattern Lab?
You will actually.
Because you just copied them out.
Well, so here it is. That's the one in the Drupal version, and in Pattern Lab, it lives because I'm not exactly sure. Okay, I'm wrong. So that to me is strange. When I build sites, because I did not actually build this, everything that exists in one exists in the other. Like I'm building the actual markup. There are some things that exist in Drupal that you don't need in Pattern Lab, but everything that Drupal is using for components, it's getting from Pattern Lab.
Okay, because so we use that, we have components in there, but then people came in and like styled layout container in
Okay.
CSS, and then in Drupal, it had stuff there. Then you go to Pattern Lab and it's gone, and then you start searching for like hours. Where does that now come from? Because on the individual components, the HTML is shared.
So what the layout? So that's a more an internal communication thing or processes. You know, you don't put background colors on layout containers, for example. I mean, it's a silly example.
We use like grid stuff. We use.
But then it should be something grid specific and not layout. The layout container does not imply grid.
Just using the layout container.
Right. Okay. If you want to show me what you're talking about, I'm not.
Well, that was the reason why we landed it.
Aha.
Well, it works awesome in components. Like that's cool.
Right.
But my hope would be that there is no single HTML anymore in the Drupal theme. All you do is you load Twig files from the Pattern Lab.
Right.
So that basically, if I look at a full page in Pattern Lab and a full page in Drupal,
It's identical.
it has to be identical, no?
Doesn't have to be, but I share your ideology.
Okay.
I don't know how we'll get there yet,
Okay.
but that's a conversation I'd love to continue.
Okay.
Anyone?
It solves 80% or like 95%, and I agree you should, but it's very hard, like, if you then start in Drupal to start like to look at which classes are there, which could I use to do whatever I need.
See, that's the wrong way. See, that's the old paradigm. You don't look for the class. You add the class. You figure out this is the component name. This is where the style is going to live. This is a style specific to that class. Now, where does that class really belong? And whether you're injecting that class through Twig, through Pattern Lab, through, if you were in Drupal 7, clean markup, or however you're injecting those classes.
So let's say you push the site online and you're all good, and now the client comes and says, hey, there's a bug, a theming bug in terms of like this broken layout, let's say. And he sends you a link to the Drupal site because they have no access or they
Of course, maybe they don't know, yeah.
Yeah. What is your process then? You
So I look at the Drupal site,
yes.
and I look at the class, I look at what's broken, and I see the class, I inspect and I see the class name, and I go straight and I open up the appropriate SAS file and the appropriate Pattern Lab file that have that markup and that style, and I fix it there.
But you fix it with looking at the Drupal site, or you fix it with looking at?
Or I figure if it's not broken in Pattern Lab, I figure out why,
Okay.
and then I fix it in. If it's not broken in Pattern Lab, I figure out why not, and then I break it in Pattern Lab. And then I fix it in Pattern Lab, and then I figure out that should fix it in Drupal, and if it doesn't, I figure out why. But I'm working really hard to make sure that, because my main project right now is a Drupal 7 site still, and we're redesigning it section by section. It was the Pattern Lab thing that I demonstrated before. While it's live, it's not like one rollout, and there were several themers on it over the past 2 years before me. It's the only thing I can explain what this experience is like. It's like repairing a car engine while you are racing 100 kilometers an hour down the highway. It's really wonderful. It's wonderful and frightening all at the same time. And my what was my point about that? You have to keep both going at the same time, because I actually don't have one set of markup. I have two sets of markup.
And I think that is a bit of a problem. Like if you read about Pattern Lab, it tells you it solves all your problems. And then
No, it doesn't. It gives you a different set of problems.
Yes, and then people suddenly realize, oh, now I still have to maintain a Drupal and a Pattern Lab.
Right. The point of all of this is that you don't really, if you start using this technique, you don't have to as much anymore. Your problems have become higher level and less frequent, but you still have to worry about exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes something will, for JavaScript reasons, something will break in Drupal but not Pattern Lab, or you still got, they're still paying you for something. Yeah.
Well, but there's the other way to not do anything at all.
That's true, but then you've got two sets of templates, and then you can't really use Pattern Lab to its full ability. Anyway, we're 5 minutes over. Oh, time is up. So if you have any other questions, I'll be available in the coffee lounge now and through lunch. And thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you learned something.